I built my business from nothing, no funding, no safety net, no one to fall back on. Just long nights, constant pressure, and a willingness to take risks most people avoid. Every system, every strategy, every client relationship was earned the hard way. Over time, that effort turned into something solid, something that worked, and I protected it carefully. Until she came along. She didn't feel like a risk at the time. If anything, she felt like an opportunity. Smart, focused, quick to learn, she adapted faster than anyone I'd worked with before. She didn't just follow instructions. She understood the reasoning behind them. That's rare, and it made her valuable. So I let her in, not all at once, but steadily. First into small decisions, then into bigger ones. Eventually, into the core of the business, the parts most people never see. Client strategies, pricing logic, negotiation structures, internal workflows. The real engine behind everything. Looking back, I can pinpoint the exact moment I crossed the line from cautious to trusting. At the time, it felt like progress. In reality, it was exposure. The first signs weren't dramatic. No obvious betrayal, no clear mistake. Just small things that didn't sit right. A client conversation that felt slightly off. A deal that should have closed, but didn't. Information that seemed to surface in places it shouldn't have. Easy to ignore. And for a while I did. Because in business, not everything goes smoothly. Clients leave. Deals fall through. Competitors appear. It's normal. That's what I told myself every time something didn't add up. Until the pattern became too consistent to dismiss. Clients I had strong relationships with started pulling back. Not all at once, but enough to notice. Conversations changed tone. Trust, something that usually took time to erode, started slipping faster than it should have. That's when I stopped brushing it off. I started observing, not reacting, not accusing, just paying attention. I looked at timelines. Who had access to what information and when? Which clients had shifted and what they had in common. The deeper I went, the more uncomfortable the answers became. Because there was a link, and it kept leading back to her. Around the same time, I started hearing about a new player in the market. At first, it didn't concern me. New competitors show up constantly, and most don't last long enough to matter. But this one was different. They weren't guessing. They were precise. Their services matched mine almost exactly, not just in what they offered, but in how they offered it. Their pricing wasn't random. It reflected a structure that took years to refine. Their messaging wasn't generic. It mirrored the way I spoke to clients, the way I positioned value, the way I closed deals. To anyone else, it might have looked like coincidence. To me, it was unmistakable. This wasn't imitation from the outside. This was replication from the inside. That realization didn't hit all at once. It built slowly, piece by piece, until denying it became impossible. Every new detail reinforced the same conclusion. Someone hadn't just studied my business. They had taken it. And there was only one person who had been close enough to do that. Her. Still, I didn't confront her. Not because I doubted it, but because I understood the situation clearly enough by then. Confrontation would only confirm what she already knew, that I had figured it out. It would give her time to adjust, to cover tracks, to move faster. And speed was the one advantage I couldn't afford to give her. So I stayed quiet. I let things play out on the surface as if nothing had changed. Conversations continued. Work continued. From the outside, everything looked normal. But behind the scenes, I shifted completely. I stopped sharing anything critical. Cut off access to sensitive information in ways that didn't raise suspicion. Monitored more closely. Listened more carefully. And most importantly, I started thinking ahead. Because here's what I realized in that moment. If she had taken my systems, my strategies, my approach, then whatever she was building depended on them, which meant it also depended on their limitations. Because no system is perfect, and the person who understands its flaws best is the one who created it. That's when the situation changed for me. It stopped being about what I had lost and started being about what I knew. They might have had my blueprint, but they didn't have the full picture. And that was something I could use. Once I shifted from reacting to positioning, the entire situation became clearer and more predictable. They were moving fast. That much was obvious. The competitor, Her new venture, whether she was leading it or quietly fueling it, was expanding aggressively. New clients, louder messaging, stronger visibility. From the outside, it looked like success. But I knew exactly what I was looking at. Speed built on borrowed structure. And that kind of growth comes with pressure. So instead of getting pulled into that pace, I slowed mine down intentionally. Not in output, but in decision-making. Every move became more calculated, more deliberate. I wasn't trying to win quickly anymore. I was trying to win permanently. The first thing I focused on was my existing clients. Not just keeping them, but understanding them better than before. I reviewed every active relationship, every past interaction, every point where things could weaken. I tightened communication, improved delivery consistency, and made sure expectations were always met or exceeded. Because I knew something they didn't. Clients don't leave just because of better offers. They leave when trust becomes uncertain. And trust, once reinforced properly, is very hard to break. At the same time, I began quietly reclaiming ground. Not through aggressive outreach, but through precision. I reached out to a few former clients. Not all, just the ones I knew value consistency over hype. The conversations were simple. No pressure, no sales tactics. Just clarity. Some of them had already experienced the competitor, and what they shared confirmed what I had been observing. The onboarding was strong, but after that, things became inconsistent. Communication gaps, misaligned expectations, small execution issues that, over time, added up. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to create doubt. And doubt is the beginning of churn. I didn't need to convince them of anything. They were already seeing it themselves. All I had to do was be the stable alternative. Meanwhile, internally, I started making more strategic changes. Not visible ones. Nothing that would signal a dramatic shift, but structural improvements that increased resilience. I adjusted pricing logic slightly, making it more adaptable. Refined service delivery to reduce friction points. Streamlined processes that had previously relied too much on instinct alone. And most importantly, I built in safeguards, not just against external competition, but against internal risk. Access control became tighter. Sensitive information was segmented. No single person, no matter how trusted, would ever again have a full view of the system. That lesson had already been learned. Now it was being applied. As all of this was happening, the competitor kept pushing forward. Faster growth, bigger claims, more visibility. But with that came something else. Strain. You could start to see it, not publicly, not in obvious ways, but in subtle shifts. Messaging that became slightly inconsistent. Offers that changed too frequently. Signs of internal adjustment happening in real time. They were reacting. And reaction is different from strategy. Because reaction means something isn't holding. I paid close attention to where those cracks appeared. Client retention was the biggest one. They could bring people in, but keeping them was harder. Expectations were being set based on a model they didn't fully control. Delivery depended on nuances they hadn't mastered. And those gaps don't stay hidden forever. That's when I made another quiet move. I leaned into reputation. Not through marketing campaigns or loud positioning, but through consistency over time. Delivering results, maintaining relationships, and letting word of mouth do what it does best when it's built on something real. Gradually, things started shifting. Not dramatically, not all at once, but steadily. Clients who had left began reaching out again. Not in large numbers, but enough to matter. Conversations reopened. Opportunities returned. And this time, I handled them differently. More structured, more intentional. No assumptions. Because rebuilding isn't about returning to what was. It's about improving what comes next. On the other side, the competitor kept growing, but less smoothly. What had looked like momentum started to look like pressure. Because growth amplifies weaknesses. And their foundation, built from what they had taken, was starting to show its limits. They didn't collapse overnight. That's not how these things happen. Instead, the signs accumulated. More adjustments, more inconsistencies, more internal strain. The kind that doesn't always show publicly, but affects everything underneath. And through all of it, I stayed consistent. No confrontation, no exposure, No unnecessary moves. Because by then, I understood something clearly. I didn't need to fight them directly. All I needed to do was build something they couldn't keep up with, and let their own structure do the rest. By the time the cracks started becoming visible from the outside, I was no longer watching closely out of suspicion. I was watching with confirmation. Everything was unfolding exactly where I expected it to. At first, it was subtle, a slight shift in how they presented themselves. Messaging that used to feel sharp and consistent started becoming broader, less precise. Offers changed more frequently. Small adjustments that, on their own, didn't mean much, but together signaled something important. They were trying to fix something in motion. That's always a difficult position to be in, because when a system is solid, you refine it gradually. You don't need to keep changing direction. But when something underneath isn't working, those changes become reactive, faster, less calculated, and often visible to the people you're trying to convince. And clients notice that, not always consciously, but they feel it. At the same time, I started hearing more direct feedback. Former clients, industry contacts, even neutral observers began mentioning inconsistencies. Nothing dramatic, no public failures, no major scandals, but enough to paint a clear picture. Strong first impression, weaker follow-through. It was the exact gap I had anticipated from the beginning, because what they had taken allowed them to replicate the entry point, the part of the business designed to attract and convert. But what came after that, the delivery, the retention, the long-term relationship building, that required more than a copied framework. It required understanding, and that's where they were struggling. Meanwhile, I continued doing what I'd been doing all along, building quietly, refining constantly, and paying attention to the details that don't scale quickly but matter over time. I improved onboarding processes so clients felt clarity from day one, strengthened communication systems so nothing slipped through unnoticed, created feedback loops that allowed me to adjust before small issues became bigger ones. None of this was flashy, but it was effective, and slowly it started to show. Clients stayed longer, referrals increased, trust deepened, and most importantly, stability returned, not just externally, but internally. The business felt controlled again, predictable in the right ways, flexible where it needed to be. That stability became a contrast, because on the other side, things were becoming more volatile. They were still operating, still growing technically, but the growth had lost its smoothness. It felt forced, like they were pushing to maintain an image that no longer matched the reality underneath. And then came the first real sign of pressure, a visible change in their pricing. Not a strategic repositioning, but a reaction. Prices shifted in a way that suggested margin issues. Either they had underpriced initially to gain traction, or their costs had grown faster than expected. Either way, it pointed to the same problem. Their model wasn't holding. Shortly after that, their messaging changed again. More urgency, more emphasis on limited time offers, more effort to pull clients in quickly. That kind of shift usually means one thing: cash flow pressure. And once that starts, decisions become even more reactive. I didn't need inside information to see it. I had built systems like that before. I knew exactly how they behave under stress. And I knew what would come next. More inconsistency, more internal strain, and eventually a breaking point. Still, I didn't rush. I didn't take advantage in obvious ways. No aggressive campaigns targeting their clients, no public positioning against them. That kind of move might have accelerated things, but it also would have created noise. And noise wasn't necessary, because by now, the difference between us was clear to the people who mattered. They had momentum. I had structure, and structure always outlasts momentum. Privately, I made one final set of adjustments. I strengthened my financial position, ensuring I had enough flexibility to handle any shifts in the market. I diversified client acquisition channels slightly, so I wasn't dependent on any single stream. And I continued reinforcing the internal systems that made the business stable. It wasn't about reacting anymore. It was about being ready. Because when something unstable starts to collapse, it doesn't do so cleanly. It creates opportunities, but only for those who are prepared to handle them. and I intended to be ready. By this point, whatever role she had in that competing venture, it didn't matter anymore. The outcome was already in motion, not because I forced it, but because the foundation it was built on couldn't support what they were trying to do. They had taken the visible parts of my business, but they hadn't taken the discipline behind it. And without that, everything else was just a matter of time. By the time things started breaking in ways that couldn't be hidden anymore, I didn't feel surprised. I felt prepared. From the outside, it didn't look like a collapse at first. There was no single dramatic moment, no public failure that made everything obvious overnight. Instead, it came in layers, small breakdowns stacking on top of each other until they became impossible to manage. Missed expectations turned into frustrated clients. Frustrated clients turned into cancellations. Cancellations turned into pressure. And pressure started affecting everything else. What had once looked like confident execution began to feel rushed. Communication became inconsistent. Promises were either scaled back or overcompensated for. You could see the strain, not just in what they were offering, but in how they were operating. They weren't in control anymore. They were reacting to survive. And that shift changes everything inside a business. Because when survival becomes the focus, long-term thinking disappears. Decisions get shorter, sharper, and often more desperate. You stop building and start patching. I had seen that phase before. I knew how quickly it escalates. At the same time, the market was responding. Clients talk. Even when things aren't public, experiences get shared. Quietly, but consistently. And once enough of those conversations start aligning, perception changes. Not instantly, but irreversibly. The same people who had been drawn in by strong messaging and fast growth were now becoming cautious. Some stepped back. Others started looking for alternatives. That's where timing mattered. Because I wasn't scrambling to position myself. I already had. Everything I had been building quietly over the past months was now doing exactly what it was designed to do. Stability, consistency, clarity, things that don't always stand out during fast growth suddenly became valuable again. And I was ready for that shift. Opportunities started coming back. Not in overwhelming waves, but in steady, manageable flows. Former clients reopened conversations. New ones came in through referrals that specifically mentioned reliability as the reason they reached out. That word, reliability, kept coming up. It told me everything I needed to know about what the market was feeling. So I leaned into it, not by changing my message dramatically, but by reinforcing what was already true. Clear expectations, strong delivery, no unnecessary promises, just execution that matched what was said. And it worked. While they were trying to hold things together, I was moving forward without needing to rush. Then came the internal fractures. This part is always less visible, but more decisive. Because when external pressure builds, it doesn't just affect clients. It affects the people inside the operation. Communication breaks down. Alignment disappears. Stress turns small disagreements into bigger problems. And in a business that scaled quickly without strong foundations, those internal issues don't take long to surface. I started hearing things, not directly from their team, but through the same quiet channels that had revealed everything else. Delays. Confusion, shifting responsibilities, the kind of instability that doesn't just slow growth, it weakens everything holding it up. At that point, the outcome wasn't uncertain anymore. It was unfolding. And still, I didn't interfere. No direct moves. No attempts to accelerate what was already happening. Because interference would only create variables I didn't need. The system they built was already under strain. All I had to do was stay consistent on my side. And that consistency became a contrast that was impossible to ignore. Clients who valued speed had already made their choice. But clients who valued stability were now making a different one. And those were the ones I wanted. By now, whatever role she played in all of this had faded into the background for me. Not because it didn't matter, but because it no longer needed my attention. The decision she made had already set everything in motion. And the consequences weren't something I had to create. They were something I simply had to outlast. Because in the end, this was never about revenge. It was about resilience. And resilience doesn't need to be loud to be effective. It just needs to hold long enough for everything else to fall apart on its own. In the end, there was no dramatic finale, no public fallout, no moment where everything stopped and the story neatly concluded. Just a gradual unraveling that, piece by piece, reached a point where it couldn't continue anymore. Their operation didn't explode, it faded under pressure. Clients slowed to a trickle, then to almost nothing. The urgency in their messaging disappeared, replaced by inconsistency, then silence. Whatever internal issues had been building finally outweighed their ability to keep things running. And eventually, without announcement or explanation, they were gone. The competitor that had risen so quickly simply stopped existing in any meaningful way. By the time it happened, I wasn't watching closely anymore. I didn't need to. The outcome had been clear long before it arrived. What mattered more was where I stood. My business wasn't just stable again, it was better than it had been before any of this started. Stronger systems, clearer structure, smarter boundaries. I wasn't just operating, I was in control in a way I hadn't fully been before. And that control came from everything I had learned along the way. I no longer relied on trust alone. Access was earned and limited. Information was structured so that no single person could ever walk away with a full picture again. What had once been instinct was now reinforced with intention. The business had matured, and so had I. Every part of it, from how I built systems to how I evaluated people, had changed, not out of fear, but out of understanding. Because trust, I realized, isn't about giving someone everything and hoping they handle it well. It's about designing things so that even if they don't, the damage stays contained. As for her, I never got closure in the traditional sense. No apology, no explanation, no moment where everything was acknowledged. But I also didn't need one, because closure doesn't always come from conversations. Sometimes it comes from outcomes. She had taken what wasn't hers, believing it would give her an advantage. And for a while it did. But what she built depended on something incomplete. Something she didn't fully understand. And in the end, that gap caught up with her. Not because I forced it, but because it was always there. I didn't bankrupt her. I didn't have to. All I did was continue building, correctly, carefully, and with a level of awareness I didn't have before. And that made all the difference. If there's one thing this experience left me with, it's this. What you build matters, but how you build it matters more. Because systems can be copied. Ideas can be taken, but understanding, the kind that comes from doing the work, making the mistakes, and refining over time, that can't be stolen. And without it, nothing built on top of those things lasts. So I moved forward, not looking back, not holding on to what happened, but carrying what it taught me. Stronger, more precise, and far more difficult to break.